I have done several videos on flows and a few in Q&A, but after the WebEx session that I have with Filip from France, I really wanted to do a recap and put everything together and an update on the current capabilities of what you can do with the flows and even the payload in QRadar. I'm here on my network activity tab, and I'm covering some IPs here to hide my IP at home. And the things that you can get with this information, of course, besides source IP and destination IP, with some of that you get in some flows. But you get the port information, and from the port you can understand what type of traffic is this. For example, this 53 we know is my Quad 9 DNS resolver. But you get also an important one, which is source and destination bytes being transferred, the protocol, the application, what class of service, quality of service, and additional fields. But what can you do with this? So for example, you can determine things like have an offense at fire, like in this condition: large outbound transfer, slow rate of data, high rate of transfer. So how do we know whether there's a lot with the high rate or low rate? Well, precisely by leverage the information on those two fields. But we can do even things a little bit more sophisticated than that. What is beaconing? Beaconing is when you have some command and control mechanism in which a machine that has been compromised periodically talk to the boss and say, hey, you want me to do something? The boss doesn't respond. But when the boss wants to do something with that machine, then it replies back, and then the machine executes the command that it sends. There's an example of command and control. So how can we use this information to detect that type of beaconing? Well, precisely if we see some traffic going out, but we don't see traffic coming back, that can be an indication of beaconing, particularly if it happens periodically. In fact, if you go to, in the video description of all my videos, there is a link to a box folder. You go to the second page and download the security tutorials PDF file, and you can search in it. Let's actually do it in here. This is the actual document. As you can see, we've been doing plenty of videos here, but if you search here by beaconing, it's actually, there's detecting beaconing and detecting beaconing at irregular intervals, because the bad guys have been going clever and they don't make the client talk at the same interval to avoid detection. So you can watch those videos and see how you can detect beaconing. Of course, with the threat intelligence data that you get, the one that you get from the X-Force or any other source of intelligence, source intelligence, you can detect things like this offense is actually telling us about, that there's been a peer-to-peer type of traffic with BitTorrent. Notice the amount of flows that actually show the indication of that. And of course, if you want to see more details on those, you can just click there, and you can even analyze every one of the flows. Other things that you can detect, for example, is scanning. When something is scanning your network, there's no logs. They're not going to be so stupid to produce a log saying I'm scanning you. No, they just send either to multiple IPs, some traffic from the same source, or against an individual destination IP, they try multiple ports. So how you detect that? Well, by virtue of precisely when you have the flow information, QRadar has the rules that allows you to detect offenses like these. That somebody is scanning my DMC. Right? Other things that you can do is, by virtue of the port being used, you can discover. If you go here on the asset and server discovery, you can see that, for example, I briefly came here before and did a search on DNS server, and anything that uses port 53 should be a DNS server, and it finds that I have approved my Quad 9 here, but all these things have been sending DNS traffic. Is this something malicious? It could be. It could be that there's some malware that, in order to avoid your detection, because you collect DNS log at your enterprise, they want to use their own DNS resolver to avoid that detection. Well, you can detect those kind of things by going periodically and check not only DNS servers, but FTP server, DHCP, and because they all use different ports. And there are very many more examples of that. I don't have offenses for all of them, but one way I think I can show you some of the things that you can detect with it is if we go here on their offenses and we click on their rules, and there's actually a nice app. I made a video on it, the use case app, but that makes this search easy. But just to use the standard one, if you search here by just putting the word flow, you see, I mean, I'm going to talk later about these Acme rules. These are some rules that Filip created, and more on that later. But these are standard stuff that comes in QReader or comes from the downloading a package from the App Exchange. And notice all the things that you can actually detect. These FS are also from Philip Shepard. More on that later again. But all these things you can detect, local to local, remote to local. I mean, all these beautiful detection capabilities is possible with just standard flows. These QNI ones, again, more on the subsequent videos about those, but the ones that are not like that, these RFISI is actually very useful for threat intelligence. So again, a plethora of things that QRadarr does when you feed them standard flows. But of course, this video series is not about standard flows, because what this all is looking about the headers, the frames of the packet, but not the payload, the content of the payload itself. What if we want to look into the payload and what can we do when the content of the payload is encrypted because people are using SSL? And that is what this short video series is all about. So let me get into what can we do with the payload. So let's head to the whiteboard to describe this better. So what I've been showing with just the flow part is that QRadarr from the headers of the traffic, not the payload, extracts a bunch of fields, right? Like the ones we just saw. Feed them into the QRadarr's custom rules engine, and that allows you to see offenses that invites you to investigate anomalies based on that information. And this is what is called NetFlow. Okay. So when you have a QNI appliance in your network, basically what you do is that you connect to the network segment that you want to investigate a network tap, right? Basically, it's going to be looking at all the traffic going on, and it's called a tap. Spam, it's also called spam port, also works. But the problem with spam port is that they're not as reliable, but sometimes they only take samples of the traffic, and when the box is busy, then that's the first thing it drops. So tap is far more reliable. But when it does that, then QNI is now able to basically feed the entire content of the payload and put us through its inspectors and protocol decappers. So it actually knows and understands what's the nature of a PDF, then Excel file, an email, and all these components. They are very, very capable. And you can even go further and apply JARA rules to further put some logic onto the content of what's inside them. And then it sends those to the same custom rules engine as NetFlows, but this type of NetFlows are an extension of the standard NetFlows, and it's actually standard call-based IPFix. So, but the end result is the same. QRadarr's rules can now fire upon the content of the payload. And what are the things that you can do with it? So for one, inside the payload, you can investigate email content and look for suspicious stuff going on the email, right? You can detect information about the certificate. Sorry, I overwrote there. Certificate information, and detect certificates that are expired, or the usage of weak encryption. This is an indication of downgrade type of attacks. You can detect things like shell commands in URLs that, are they necessarily bad? Well, often, but not always, but you may want to investigate those. You can do DNS analysis, a lot of DNS analysis. You can detect tunneling. You can detect joint domains. I mean, let's say that this certificate, well, you sometimes need additional technology on top of this, but that looks at when the certificate was issued and look at the date. But you can actually see all those things and put the logic in either on Jara rule or different components. But joint domains are very important because that means that the certificate was probably created just to attack you and to avoid you knowing about them by your threat intelligence data. It's been done especially for you. You can detect in DNS when text fields are used as command and control and other sophisticated things. And you may say, well, but I do get already DNS logs. That's fine, and you should do that. But normally the malware is smart enough to use its own DNS resolver and to avoid precisely the fact that it knows that you are collecting DNS logs. So this video is already getting a little too long, so let's cut it here for part 1. And in part 2, we're going to be showing concrete examples of the things that we are talking. And probably I'll do a part 3 where I show what happened when you do SSL encryption and how, when people go dark, how can you still do some of that inspection of what the alternatives that are more productive out there are, particularly with QNI.